Hey folks, welcome. Good evening. Michael Mann from Michael Mann Security Services. We're going to talk about the mindset of the active shooter tonight. Welcome. If you've been trapped inside your homes due to the virus, we're glad that you are joining us. We hope that your family and that you are well. Real quick, let's talk about how to get a hold of us, where our website is, what all that means. So if you want to go to our website, you can go to michaelmannsecurityservices.com. We have information about us, our scheduled events and training, and there's a bunch of free information and white papers very specifically for church security teams. You can give us a call, or you can give Scott a call, and he'll answer anytime, even at 2 o'clock in the morning. Just kidding. 615-606-1006. Or you can shoot us an email at scottm, SCOTTM, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. And you can visit us or send us a message on Facebook or Instagram, and that's at SafeWithMan. All right? So let's go over expectations real quick, how this is going to work. If you guys joined us for past webinars, again, welcome. You've seen this before. So we're going to spend about 30, maybe 40 minutes, probably more than the 30-minute mark on this one. So a 30-minute presentation or webinar. The purpose of this is to assist churches with addressing the vulnerabilities of this active shooter event, of these active shooter incidents. Here's what I need you to do. Practice a questioning attitude. Here's what this means. If you've got a question, then please take notes. And so as you do this, get a piece of paper, get a pen, take notes, because at the end of this, there's going to be a Q&A. You can type your questions into Facebook. Scott's going to see those. He's going to read them back to me, and I'll read them again so people can hear it, and then I'll answer the question for you. Here's what this practice of questioning attitude means. There may be something on here that maybe you just think, I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've got a question about it. You've heard something different. I want you to practice questioning attitude. Write that down, and then ask me about it during the Q&A, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. All right? So we'll get started very quickly. Again, the Q&A is at the end. Please write your questions down. A lot of information. I'll get through it pretty quickly. Obviously, because you're not here, I'm not going to stop and slow down, so you don't forget your questions. Document those now, and then shoot those to Scott. And you can shoot those questions to Scott at any time. He's going to see them. He's going to write them down or type them out, and that way at the end of this, he can ask those questions, and I'll give you those answers. All right, so let's talk about just a problem statement. A problem statement is just an overall issue that someone in an organization may have, and we try to solve that. And so when we start to talk about the active shooter or these active aggressor events, here's some things in my experience that I'm seeing very specifically with churches. So post-incident, so this is after the event occurs, we are really good at addressing consequence, but we're really not very good at addressing vulnerability. Now here's what this means. Consequence is the impact of what this incident does to our church. Vulnerability is a system weakness, and most of the time in physical security, that is something that we are not doing, okay? So when we think about it, we address the consequence but not the vulnerability. This bad thing happens, and then we all get spun up, and we try to very quickly, based on the impact of this event, we try to put things in place that we didn't have before. We try to solve a problem very quickly without thinking through that problem because of what this has caused to someone else. And so most of the time what that means is what we've seen over the last couple shootings is guns, locking doors, camera systems, spending a whole lot of resources that our church may or may not have. And so I will tell you, guns, locking doors, and cameras are not going to address the active shooter issue. And when we get into the mindset part of this and the way that they think and what's required to be successful in an active shooter event for the bad guy, you're going to see, doesn't matter how many guns we have, doesn't matter how many doors we lock, it doesn't even matter how many cameras you have, that's just not going to solve the problem. The other issue is, or one of the other issues, or maybe one of the problems we look at, or something I've noticed, church security functions are primarily managed and conducted by volunteers. So because this is a volunteer function, gets into this last issue, resources are very limited. You're not getting paid. There's not a big budget for training. The church and the team is very dependent upon the experience and the resources that the volunteers bring to the church. And so there's most of the time there is a gap. So when we start to talk about the issue, especially with active shooters, some of the things we see, and so we're going to try to address this tonight. Give you some free information you can take back with your teams. Let your teams watch this, and you guys can walk through this process. And as we start to try to give you some answers to this problem statement, feel free at any time to email Scott, email me, give us a call, and we'll try to answer these if something comes up that we don't address in this presentation. All right, so I try to make this very, very simple for everybody. And so I'm a Marine Corps veteran. Everything's got to be in crayon or some kind of acronym. And so that's the way that I treat everybody. It just makes it really, really simple. So I'm going to break this down in these little groups. You're going to see these little topics up at the top of the presentation in blue. And that way you can remember them very easily like I can, okay? It's even hard for me to read this. Like Scott's like, he's back in the back and he's kind of motioning all this stuff to me so I can remember it, all right? So just remember, violent attacks are not frequent. If you guys have sat through our webinars in the past, I talk about this all the time. This is important because, one, we don't want to conflict with the mission of the church. We don't want to do things that conflict with what we're trying to do. And two, this is such a big topic. People think this happens all the time. Well, that's not the case. Number one, this is a low probability, high consequence event, which means the likelihood of this happening is very, very low for you guys. Now, the consequence, which is what we always address afterward, is very, very high. So more than likely, this is never going to happen. But because the consequence of this is so high for a church, or the impact, everybody runs to this, and this is the first thing when we talk about security that we try to address, and we try to spend a lot of money and resources on this. But understand this doesn't happen a lot, and more than likely it's not going to happen at your church. There are over 300,000 Protestant churches in the United States of America. That doesn't, obviously, Protestant churches, we're not talking about the Catholics, Mormons, we're not talking about the Jewish faith or any other faith. We're just talking about our religions. We're just talking about Protestant churches. And out of that number, in the last 19 years, about 14, or right at 14 attacks in the last 19 years. So again, this is a very low probability or low likelihood event with a very, very high consequence. So we like to put resources toward this. It's why we're doing this webinar, so you understand this. But understand the probability of this occurring is very, very low at your church. Okay. All right. So let's get into this. You've heard this, that violent attacks. So an attack will happen at a church or a school or a business, and then as you watch the news, you'll see on the news report, the reporter will say, and there was a random attack at a church or a random attack on business. So understand, violent attacks are not random. This is good news for us because as a security team, we can see these things 2 weeks, 2 months before they happen if we're trained the right way, and we're going to cover that. So when we start to talk about this kind of violence, we're talking about predatory violence. Two types of violence, predatory and effective. Effective is defensive in nature. It means we are responding to some sort of an imminent threat. Like somebody physically threatens us. So effective means it's something that's emotional. A good example would be go back to like a domestic violence incident. And so any former police officers out there, when you showed up at a scene, there's been a fight with a couple, a husband and wife, for whatever reason, something said, the spouse then hits their spouse. The other spouse very quickly reacts, and before you know it, people are in trouble. So that's effective violence. It's defensive. They're responding to something that's happening. Predatory is very offensive in nature. And what that means is it's planned, it's purposeful, and it's emotionless. Okay? So what that means is this process that the active shooter goes through, predatory, all of this is planned, and there's a process or a cycle that they have to follow, and they do this without training. And so remember, these violent attacks are not random. They are planned, they are premeditated. All right? So from a biblical perspective, and again, I'm not a pastor. You've heard me say this before as you said it on our webinars, but we go all the way back to the very first murder that was committed by Cain when he killed his brother Abel. And when we read in Genesis, very plainly it says, Cain was very angry and led his unsuspecting brother into the field and killed him. Now, if you know this situation between Cain and Abel, Cain is upset because Abel is found, or the Lord finds favor in Abel because of his heart and because of the offering that he was given to the Lord. And Cain didn't have his heart into it. There was much less of an offering on Cain's side. And so Cain sees this favor. He gets upset. The Lord even talks to him and says, ask him, why are you upset? You know what you're doing. Do the right thing and you won't feel this way. And so Cain gets upset. There's a grievance there, and he goes through this process to figure out how he's going to make this right, and he decides to kill his brother. So when you look at this and you read this, he led his unsuspecting brother into the field. There was a planning process there, or there had to be a planning process there. So just a biblical example or perspective of what this process looks like. So when we start to talk about this process, this is really the things that you guys are going to want to remember. So if you don't want to write anything else down, write this down, because this is this planning or pre-attack methodology that they're going to go through. This is an example. Okay. So when we talk about they're not random, here's the methodology. And I call this the adversary attack methodology. Some people call this an attack cycle. I'm going to walk you through the process, and then I'm going to give you an example of a church attack that happened in Texas a couple of years ago, because we have information, number one, about that adversary. We have information, number two, about the attack, a lot of information. I'll walk you through that after I walk you through the methodology. So methodology, number one, the bad guy's going to choose a target. Now, you always hear bad guys choose soft targets. In this process, when we think about a soft target, it's not what we normally think about. A soft target, by definition, is something that is undefended. Well, here the bad guy's not looking for guns. He doesn't care about that. He's not looking for gates. Or cameras. That's not his concern. When we're talking about choosing a target with a church, a grievance like with Cain has started, and then they go through the process of trying to find that target. And in this case, when we start to choose the target, again, for active shooters, guns are not going to prevent this. They're looking for other vulnerabilities, and most of the time that is not being discovered, and we'll get into that. So they're going to choose a target. We probably will not see the grievance process or why they choose our church. We won't know it. We won't see it, but you need to understand the process. The next thing is the next step in this is they're going to gather information about that target. This happens in two places. One, they can go online, they can call, they can gather information before they even get on site. And then the next part of that is, at some point they will have to go on site to take a look around for a number of reasons. Number one, it is to gather information, but that information is going to tell them a couple things, and this happens through surveillance. One, it's going to tell them what the pattern for that church is or for that target. So what time does this start? How many people are in the sanctuary? How do I get in there? So this is information that they're going to naturally gather and that they're going to have to be successful. Then they're going to gather resources. We're not going to see this either. We're going to see gathering of information, or we could see it, but when they gather their resources, what that means is they're going to get the weapons, they're going to get the explosives, they're going to get the things they need to be successful, and more than likely, we're not going to see that as a security team. Then they're going to go through the process of rehearsing this. Sometimes we see this, sometimes we do not. Sometimes other people see it and they report it after the attack. And so they will actually go through the process of rehearsing the attack that they are planning. So as they go through this planning process, they will rehearse the attack to ensure that they can be successful. Then they'll actually conduct the attack. There are attack execution elements that we can see. So this is something obviously that we can see. And then the last part of this is a lot of times they want to get away. And there are certain processes or certain elements in that escape process that is a security team that we will recognize, obviously because the attack has occurred. So this is a basic breakdown of the methodology. And I'm going to walk you through very quickly an attack and how this worked for that adversary. And this works with every adversary. And before we get into this, understand you don't have to have military training. You don't have to have any specialized training to go through this process. We are human beings. We are sinful. We have evil hearts, and we do this naturally because of our nature. And so we don't have to have any training to do this. This doesn't take any kind of special effort. We will naturally understand this process because of our sinful nature. And if you don't believe we're sinful and we're not bad, then you're probably tuning into the wrong webinar. But this is why they're successful, because by nature, this is what we are. Okay? Going to play a news clip real quick of the. This is some information about the attack that happened in Sutherland Spring, Texas, back in 2017. I want you to listen to the newscast of this presentation, and it's going to help as I walk you through the process of the attack. So after you hear this, watch this video, then what we're going to do is I'll put up another presentation, another slide, and I'm going to walk you through choosing the target, gathering information, gathering resources, rehearsal, the attack, and the attempted escape of Devin Kelly, who attacked this little small Baptist church in Texas.
The church shooting in Texas. This morning, there are serious questions about how the gunman was able to buy firearms despite his history of domestic violence.
And we're hearing now from the survivors who made it out of that shooting alive. Our senior national correspondent Matt Gutman spoke with them. He starts us off in Sutherland Springs. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, George. We knew the slaughter in that church behind me was bloody, but what we didn't know until now was how methodical Devin Kelly went about doing it. Those survivors describing him walking back and forth from the altar to the back of the church, selecting targets, firing, reloading, doing it again. Many of them only saw his boots, and they say he said one thing: everybody is going to die. This morning, the scale of the horror inside that shoebox-sized church, shocking even to investigators.
I can tell you that the scene in there is horrific.
And for the first time, survivors described the terror as a murderer stalked the house of worship.
People screaming and people crying and, "Mama, where are you, Mama?" The little kids.
Roseanne Solis was discharged from the hospital late Monday, arriving home into the embrace of family members.
I saw bodies with a lot of blood. That's all I saw, because I wasn't about to get out from where I was hiding.
Was anybody trying to get away? Was there anywhere to go?
No, there wasn't nowhere to go.
Solis said the shooter's only words were, "Everybody dies."
Did you play dead?
Yes, I did. I played dead, and I made sure that I hid myself good under that bench.
This morning, Farida Brown and 13 other victims remain hospitalized. We spoke to her son, David.
She just laid on the floor. The shooter was shooting any and everybody he could see. I guess everybody trying to run. And then after nobody was moving, they just laying on the floor. He walked up and down all the aisles shooting everybody as they laid on the floor.
How many times do you think he went up and down?
She said about 10 to 15 times.
Brown telling us his mom's now bullet-pocked cell phone likely saved her life. Among the murdered, 8 members of a single family, the Holcombs. Associate Pastor Brian was one of them, seen here speaking at the church 2 weeks earlier.
If you're in Christ Jesus, you have a ministry.
But more may have died had it not been for Stephen Williford, who opened fire on the suspect after he fled the church.
People at that church, they're friends of mine, their family. And every time I heard a shot, I knew that that probably represented a life. I was scared to death. I'm no hero. I am not. I think my God, my Lord, protected me and gave me the skills to do what needed to be done. And I just wish I could have gotten there faster.
Johnny Langendorf, who chased the suspect along with Williford, showing our David Muir video he shot on his cell phone during the last moments of the shooter's life.
So you can see the police moving in right there.
Yes. Just over that left divider, they would find the killer dead. And overnight, those two heroes seeing each other for the first time since the shooting, falling into an embrace. Now, this is a community of 650 people. Obviously, the loss of 26 lives is causing it to reel, but the real gut punch here is the loss of that Holcomb family we just mentioned. 3 generations gone. Grandparents, parents, and 4 grandchildren. And when you talk to folks here, they say what really angers them is that Devin Kelly should never have been allowed to buy those weapons in the first place.
All right, so I'm going to walk you through. So you heard some of the victims that survived the attack, the escape. So he tried to go through the escape process and was stopped by a responder, and we're going to get into that later on here. But let me walk you through the methodology that he followed like what we talked about in the slide before. So Devin Patrick Kelly was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force after being convicted of domestic violence. So when he was in the Air Force, Kelly actually was convicted of abusing or assaulting his wife. All right. So he's dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. His first wife divorces him. He gets out. And then, if I remember, he had a job in the beginning as a security guard. I think somehow there was a slip up. He was able to be employed as an armed security guard, and then the company finds out that he was dishonorably discharged, and then he is terminated. He goes through some odd jobs, and then at some point, Kelly meets another young lady, starts to date her. At some point convinces this woman to marry him, and then during this time he starts to abuse her also. All right, and so at some point she gets tired of that. The police are called several times after their house, and then she leaves. So she walks away from him, and so his estranged wife and her family at some point attended Sutherland Springs Church there, the little Baptist church. He knew that. And so he started to select the target based on this grievance of his ex-wife or estranged wife in the family. And so his target is now, the target selection process is because of the grievance with the family, is the church. From what I understand, based on the information we have from this, he had been to the church before, so he had information, and then goes to conduct more information or get more information about the church. So this happened on a Sunday in November, actually on the 5th. On Tuesday the 31st, the church was having an event, I believe like a trunk or treat event. And so the campus was open. Of course, it's a small church. People were coming on site. They had food. Devin Kelly shows up that Tuesday, the Sunday before the attack, to gather more information and surveillance on that church. And so he shows up. He's walking around, acts very strange. He gets the attention of some folks that were there. He made them very nervous. They told some men that were there that this guy was acting strange. They followed him around while he was there, but they never stopped him. And that Sunday, when right before the attack, nothing was brought up about this person walking around. They really didn't think anything else about it. So because of that, this was a surprise. So he's there gathering information the Tuesday before the attack of that Sunday. So he's gathering surveillance, following up with what he needs to go through the process to conduct the attack. When we get into rehearsal, after the attack was committed and he's killed, what happens is he's got a neighbor that lived close to him. So Kelly had some property. On that property, there was a space where he would shoot. Before the attack, the neighbor tells the police afterward that he heard Kelly shooting what sounded to be a rifle for several days and shooting a lot of ammo. So based on the information that we received from that witness, we believe that that was part of the rehearsal for the attack itself. So on the 5th, he pulls up, gets out of his vehicle. It's a very small church, goes into the church, attacks the church, goes through the attack execution process. While he's attacking the church, the person that you saw on the video hears the attack, grabs his rifle, responds to the church. As Kelly is trying to escape, he engages Kelly. He does shoot him. Kelly gets into his vehicle. Another responder shows up, and then, of course, you heard them talk. They chase Kelly down the interstate. They call 911, and, of course, by the time the police get there, Kelly has bled out and he dies. So he goes through the entire process of selecting the target, getting information about the target. He goes through the process, which we don't know what that looked like. We don't know when he bought the rifle, but obviously he did buy weapons or he purchased weapons and ammunition. We know he rehearsed. Then he went through the attack execution process during the attack, obviously, and then he tried to escape but was stopped by an armed responder that came off site to try to stop him because the guy lived close and heard the attack. So these are not random. Every attacker at a church, every terrorist, any violent offender will go through this process. And we think that because Kelly was in the Air Force, he learned that there. Kelly did not have any infantry or any kind of combat arms experience. This is just something, again, because of who we are. It's we're sinful by nature, we're broken, we're fallen, and so this is something that we will naturally go through once we want to attack. All right, so what are the requirements? This is going to help you and your team. What are the requirements for a successful attack? We've talked about this already. Well, number one is I got to gather information. So if I'm the bad guy, I got to gather information about your facility. Now, the good thing about this is something your security team can see. So when someone comes on site and they're gathering surveillance, this is something that you very quickly can recognize if you're trained to do that and see it. So going through the mindset of the active shooter, when I'm there trying to gather that information, trying to get information about what time the services start, how many people are there, what are going to be the easiest targets for me to walk into and attack, you can see that. The second element I need to need to have to be successful is surprise, unsuspecting. Remember with Kelly, he showed up that Tuesday and walked around. People saw him. They thought he was very strange. It freaked them out. They had somebody follow him around. But that Sunday, this was not brought up again. They were not suspecting for Kelly to come up and to conduct this attack. So it was a surprise. So the element of surprise is needed to be successful. Access to the target. For a church, that's easy. Our mission is to open the doors and to get everybody inside. So access to the target in a church is very, very easy. Control of the situation. That's the purpose of the gun. Get in very quickly once you have access, start to shoot, surprise everybody, and you control the situation. And then, of course, mobility, and that is my ability as the adversary to move around, and at the end to escape. As a security team, if I take any of this away, and we're going to get into this, if I take any of these elements away, the adversary cannot be successful. And when we're looking for those folks that are gathering information 2 weeks, 2 months before, if we identify that and we address that, we can take that element of surprise away and possibly impact that motivation to conduct the attack. Okay? 2 types of response to these incidents. Both are undesirable. One is the immediate response. That's an on-site response. That can be from a security team, that can be from an armed citizen, that can be from a police officer that just happens to be there. And there's the delayed response. That's the off-site response by law enforcement personnel. Again, let me say this, because you think when I talk about immediate response security teams, that's a great thing. It is, but understand, if you've heard our other webinars, that only mitigates the impact. So both of these are undesirable, and this is why. This is an example, you guys have seen this, of an immediate response. This doesn't go through the entire process, but you'll see this is the attack that happened late last year in Texas, just outside of Fort Worth. This is where there was an immediate response, but understand, even with those security team members inside the sanctuary, 2 people were still killed. Our job as security team members is to prevent the event from occurring. So it was great that there was an immediate response. He was neutralized, but 2 people were still killed. So even an immediate response only mitigates the impact. I'll let you hear just a little bit about this if you haven't seen this video.
Video captures the moment a gunman wearing a dark hoodie emerges from a back pew, drawing his gun and firing inside this Texas church during Sunday morning service. The gunshots sparking panic in the pews. Worshippers seen ducking for cover. One man covering his wife with his own body. 6 seconds into the shooting, 2 members of the church security team returned fire, hitting the gunman, dropping him to the ground. The 911 calls came shortly before 11 a.m.
Active threat, 1900 South Las Vegas Trail.
Inside the church, at least 5 other parishioners pulled out handguns and carefully approached the fallen gunman. One man kicks away his gun and picks it up.
It was a sad thing that he had to come into the congregation and hurt people, and it's a sad thing that we had to hurt him.
We're going to need help with patient care.
2 churchgoers and the gunman were killed.
The citizens who were inside that church undoubtedly saved 242 other parishioners.
One woman said her mother, a longtime member of the church, saw the suspect and noticed something was wrong.
The shooter was sitting next to my mother. She knew from growing up at the church that she didn't recognize this gentleman.
Outside, law enforcement secured the area as parishioners, visibly shaken, consoled one another.
We lost 2 great men today, but it could have been a lot worse.
Today, evil walked boldly among us. But let me remind you, good people raised up and stopped it.
All right. So here you notice at the end of this, when you saw the end of the shooting, a lot of folks with guns. They're taking the shotgun. All of those guns, it's Texas. It's like Tennessee, like where we are. A lot of people have guns in churches. All those guns did not prevent the violence. It is what we see 2 weeks, 2 months before that prevents the attack. And so with all those guns, we still had, unfortunately, 2 people die. So prevention, stopping something from happening. Unfortunately, even with the immediate response, our assets can still be compromised. So the asset's something we're trying to protect. And remember, even with the guns, folks, this person has already planned the attack. They've already gathered information. They've rehearsed. They've planned this thing all the way through. And so they're already in the action phase as we're trying to figure this out. And action always beats our reaction. So even with the immediate response, it just mitigates. All right. The delayed response. Let me walk you through this real quick. This is a video from about Sandy Hook Elementary School. So we talk about Sandy Hook Elementary School. Let me go past here and see that yep. So we start talking about Sandy Hook. Adam Lanza went into elementary school, shot his way in, was inside the building for about 12 minutes. 5 minutes into the attack, the police are called. So somebody finally calls about 5 minutes after the attack has started. About 9 minutes into the attack, the police show up. Right about 9:39, they still do not get into the building until about 9:44. So there's still about a 6-minute delay before they actually get into the building. So this thing is over almost by the time when they pull up. When we talk about this delayed response, or what we used to call in the police world, we call it rapid deployment. It's not very rapid. What has to happen is somebody has to call the police have to be dispatched, they have to get there. There's even a bigger consequence to the delayed response, okay? So again, it's just mitigating, and more than likely, this thing's going to be over. So I want you to hear the consequence of the delayed response. And so this is a teacher. This is Adam Lanza passed her room. Her door happened to be shut, passed her room, and never tried to enter her classroom. And as he's shooting, and as this process is happening, the attack execution, I want you to hear what she has to say about what she's thinking and the psychological consequence that's happening as she's waiting on a delayed response to happen for them to come in and try to save her and the children. Luckily, she survived. He never tried to go into her classroom for whatever reason, but this is the impact of a delayed response, or part of it. Sorry, folks, we've got we had some technical difficulties on this. So let me explain to you what happened with her. So she's in her classroom. She hears the gunfire. She's hoping someone's called 911. It's about 5 minutes. It's about 3 minutes after this started. Somebody finally in the office did, because they were afraid. They were hiding as he was going through the building looking for targets. And so as the gunfire is happening, she's taking the kids, putting them put them in a bathroom, and she's trying to keep the kids calm. As she's going through this process, she thinks she's going to die. She thinks the children are going to die. And, of course, they're asking her questions. She's telling them that she loves them, and she's hoping that the police get there. By the time the police do get there, this is almost over with. They have to deal with something in the parking lot while he's in there shooting. And by the time they figure out what's happening, Lanza does commit suicide. And so when we talk about the delayed response, understand that police response is ineffective in general. 80% of all active shooter incidents end before the police arrive. That's nationally, not just at churches. That's when we start talking about all the incidents all together, we compile the data. Response requirements. Number one, we've talked about this. This is why it's difficult for the police to get there. Number one, they don't know what's happening. So somebody's got to pick up the phone, call 911. We see that there's a 2 to 5 minute delay, even with all the communication devices we have today. When an active shooter incident occurs, there's about a 2 to 5 minute delay before someone calls 911. And that's because of the shock value of this. It's a surprise. They've gone through this process. They have the element of surprise. They're in control. And because of that, there's a delay for police to get notified. Once there's a communication and they're notified, then the dispatcher has to contact the police. The police have to deploy, so they have to get from point A to point B. And then once they get from point A to point B, then they have to get in the target area and try to stop the threat. That is a very long process, and most of the time, by the time that happens, this is done. If they do get there, the suspect is still shooting, he's still inside the building attacking, and they are able to get in to try to neutralize. And this comes from alerts straight out of Texas. So Texas State University, University in Texas does a program called Alert. It's an active shooter training program for police departments across the country. This stuff, this 46% rate comes from them, not me. So according to them, because they do studies on this all the time, this is what they do, this is what they get paid to do. When police officers get inside the target area and the adversary is shooting and he wants to fight, they take a 46% casualty rate, the police do. Let me say that again. If they're there on time, which 80% of the time they are not, but they get there, they get in the building to neutralize the threat, there is a 46% casualty rate for the police. And the reason for this is because they don't do this. This is not something that, believe it or not, something that they're trained to do. They're not specialized in this, even a SWAT team. I spent several years in the Marine Corps in Fast Company. I spent 11 years as a full-time police officer in Nashville, Tennessee. A large part of that was with Special Weapons and Tactics. Later on, went to the Department of Energy as a full-time Special Response Team or SWAT person, later as a commander. I will tell you, my time, even though it took a year to get on SWAT in Nashville, going through the process, going through a basic school, an advanced school, weapons training, it was ineffective. I was not prepared to answer the hundreds of call-outs that I answered and went to. And it's because the training does not prepare you to deal with what you're having to deal with. Because as a police officer in this country, that's not your job. They're not soldiers. And so that training, for the most part, is very poor, and it's very ineffective, and it provides an ineffective response. And when we start to talk about the LEOs, the law enforcement officers that are responding to this, they're not SWAT teams. They're just patrol officers. So they don't get any of that advanced training that a SWAT team member would get. So it's very, very ineffective. And so this is why you see this casualty rate. And also, when we talk about the requirements for the attack and the process, remember, if there's somebody in a building with a gun, they have control. The police are having to conduct a stronghold assault, which is an assault option, which is very, very dangerous. Okay? The most dangerous out of the three. All right, so here's the deal. Your team has the ability to prevent the attacks. Concentric rings of protection. That is putting multiple layers, and that doesn't mean you have to have 100 team members. You could have 5. What that means is I'm putting security team members in locations throughout the church, which includes outside, to look for some of this behavior. And if somebody on the outside misses it, somebody at the skin of the building or at the door can see it, and if they miss it, maybe somebody inside the church sees it. So you're putting your security team members in layers. It's a layered approach. Situational awareness. It's not just the color codes, guys. If you read some of Cooper's stuff, you've heard our stuff before, it's not just about condition yellow. Situational awareness is actually taking the element of surprise away from the adversary. That's what situational awareness does. Yes, it's being in condition yellow, going into orange and red if necessary, but understand it's not just standing in the parking lot looking around. If I'm situationally aware, I'm taking that element of surprise out, which means it's going to take the ability for that adversary to conduct the attack. Deterrence. Being out there and watching actually can psychologically impact the motivation for that adversary to conduct the attack. Even if you don't know they're going to attack or you don't even know what you're looking at, they might think that you do know. It's happened in active shooter events throughout the country. The adversary is captured, and they've told law enforcement officials that they didn't attack that school or that business because they thought they were discovered at another location. Early detection, the point of concentric rings of protection and knowing what we're looking for is to detect this activity early, and that reduces the amount of control that the adversary has. So even if I don't see it 2 months before, maybe I see it 2 minutes before, if I see it in the parking lot, they don't get inside the building and the fight happens out there, then what that does is that takes away or reduces the amount of control, which lessens the impact or that ability for that adversary to conduct that successful attack. Okay? All right, folks, we've been on this thing for about 39 minutes. I said about 30. I'm going to open this up for questions, okay? Doesn't look like we have any questions at all. Anything coming in? Nothing? Okay. All right, folks. Again, if you have questions, you can shoot those to Scott now as I'm reading this, and if he pops back up and says we've got some, I'll answer them. Go to our website, michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Again, you can send us an email through the website. There's a bunch of free resources on that website for you to include white pages and videos. You can call us at 615-606-1006. You can email us at scottm, SCOTTM, at michaelmannsecurityservices.com. Ask those questions there, and Scott will answer them, or he'll send them to me so I can answer them. You can get us on Facebook or Instagram at Safe with Man. We appreciate you joining us tonight. Hope you got something out of tonight's webinar. Please don't be afraid to ask us some questions. And please go to the website. There's a bunch of free stuff on there. If you haven't visited that website before, there's probably some stuff on there that can help you, especially if you've got limited resources with your teams. All right, guys. Thanks again. And remember, folks, it's about prevention, not response.